Horse stand.
The case you're about to see is fictional, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public. Jennifer Hollings, aged 30, is charged with wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm to her son Matthew, aged 15 months, an indictment to which she has pleaded not guilty.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mrs. Daly, you are Mary Elizabeth Daly of 9 Vicarage Drive, Fulchester.
Yes.
Mrs. Daly, I want you to tell the court in your own words about the incident you saw on September the 6th.
I was walking up Bank Lane on my way to my daughter's. It's a shortcut. I saw that lady.
Is there any dispute?
No, Your Honour.
Mrs. Daly, you saw the lady in the dock?
Yes. I noticed her really because she had one of those pushchairs. You don't see many of them these days. The child sat facing her. You know. She was talking to him. I thought, how much better than those buggies everyone's got.
Mrs. Daly, could you speak louder so that the jury can hear you? You saw the defendant talking to her child in the pushchair?
Yes. And that was the strange thing.
What was?
Well, she was talking away to him, and he was fast asleep. I mean, she could see he was asleep. But to be honest, I thought she was a bit, well, you know, wrong in the head.
You mustn't tell us what you thought, Mrs. Daly, only what you actually saw.
Oh. I'm sorry, sir.
You saw the defendant talking to the sleeping child?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, I just kept on walking. Well, I never thought that... Her voice got louder and louder. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. Then she started swearing at him. Swearing and shouting at the top of her voice. You bastard! You such and such bastard. Well, I had to turn round. I thought there was only me there.
What did you see when you turned round?
Well, I was wrong. There was somebody else, a girl. But she seemed to be rooted to the spot. And that woman, she had dragged the little boy out of the pushchair and she was shaking him so hard. And then she held his legs and started hitting his head against a fence. All the time screaming and swearing at him. There was blood all over his head. Well, it was the worst thing I've ever seen, and I hope never to see such a thing again.
What happened next, Mrs. Daly?
Well, all I could think was, I must get the child off her before she kills him.
Mrs. Daly, you really must try and confine yourself to what you actually saw and not tell us what opinion you formed.
I'm sorry, sir. It's very difficult.
It is very difficult, and we all sympathise with you.
Mrs. Daly, you turned round and saw the defendant attacking the child. Did you do anything?
Yes, I shouted to the girl. She was much nearer than I was, but she didn't take any notice. Then I knew it was up to me. I ran as fast as I could. I got quite close to her, the defendant. I shouted to her, "Stop it!" But she just went on banging his head against the fence. And she was still screaming and swearing. I shouted to the girl, "At least phone the police." But she just stood there with her eyes fixed on the child. Well, I suppose she was too shocked.
Did you try to take the child from the defendant?
I did my best, but she hung on like grim death. She screamed at me to go away. Well, she didn't put it like that. Oh. And there was something funny. In the middle of it all, I made out this name she was calling him. Joanne. Well, he was a boy. I mean, you could see he was a boy. Sometimes you can't tell the difference, but he was a proper boy. And I thought, well, he's never called Joanne. And he's not, is he?
Mrs. Daly, you tried to get the child away from the defendant.
Yes, but as I said, I couldn't. She was too strong. And all the time, this girl's just standing there like a wet lettuce. And then this man came running down Bank Lane. He seemed to know her. He shouted, "Jennifer!"
What did the defendant do then?
Oh, she set off like a bat out of hell down towards the river. But he caught her at the bottom. He couldn't get the child off her either. Then the police arrived. I don't know who'd phoned them. And finally, the pair of them, this man and the policeman, they got the child away from her. That's all, really.
Thank you, Mrs. Daly.
Mrs. Daly, this incident was an enormous shock to you, wasn't it?
It was terrible. I was shaking for days after.
You've described it in great detail. You remember it very well?
You can't forget something like that, can you? Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can see it as if it's happening again.
How dreadful for you. Are you absolutely certain that there's nothing you've forgotten to tell us?
Nothing.
You see, Mrs. Daly, there's just one thing I find puzzling in your evidence. You've told us that you saw Mrs. Hollins screaming and attacking her son. But the child must obviously have been frightened and in pain, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yes.
A frightened, badly hurt child. And yet you make no mention of hearing him scream, Mrs. Daly. Did you hear him scream?
Well, perhaps I couldn't make him out over the noise that she was making.
But you didn't actually hear the child scream?
No, I didn't.
Thank you, Mrs. Daly. No more questions.
I have no re-examination, Your Honour.
You may leave the witness box now, Mrs. Daly.
Thank you, Your Honour.
I call David Maxwell Hollins. Mr. Hollins, you are the husband of the defendant.
A separated husband.
And you were present during the incident in question.
I wasn't actually with my wife, but I arrived in time to see what happened.
Can I just clarify something, Mr. Jessup?
Of course, Your Honour.
Mr. Hollins, if you weren't actually with your wife and you're separated, was it sheer coincidence that you happened to be there on this occasion?
No, Your Honour. September the 6th was a Sunday, and I'd been to my wife's house to pick up my children. She'd handed over our eldest son, Stephen, but she wouldn't let me have Matthew. She never does. I was waiting outside in the car, hoping to persuade her to let me have Matthew as well, when she came out with him in the pushchair. The house isn't far from Bank Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Hollins. I just wanted to establish why you were present. Proceed, Mr. Jessup.
Your Honour, my next question was in fact to make clear the reason for Mr. Hollins' presence.
Oh, I think that's been satisfactorily established.
Mr. Hollins, did you see your wife turn the corner into Bank Lane?
Yes. I tried to talk to her about having Matthew as she was walking along. She wouldn't listen to me. I didn't want any kind of scene in front of my children or my mother either. She was sitting in the back of the car with Stephen. So I got in the car and drove on a bit. I got as far as the roundabout by the Hare and Hounds, and I turned the car around and drove back.
Why did you do that, Mr. Holly?
I thought, damn it, he is my son after all. She can't really stop me seeing him. I drove down Dutton Road, parked the car, and ran down to Bank Lane.
Did you see your wife immediately?
Yes, I saw her directly. I turned the corner. She had hold of Matthew by his arm and leg, and she was banging his head against the fence.
What did you do?
Nothing for a second. I just froze. Then I shouted to my mother to phone the police, and I ran to try and get Matthew away from her. Mrs. Daly was already trying. There was a girl standing there watching.
Did you get him away from her?
No. As soon as she saw me, she started to run. I cornered her at the bottom of Bank Lane, and she fought me like a mad thing. I could have used more force, but I didn't want to hurt Matthew any more than he was hurt already. There was blood all over his head. I think I would have killed her if the police hadn't arrived when they did.
Thank you. Now, was the child eventually rescued from the defendant?
P.C. Warren and I managed it together.
Thank you, Mr. Hollings.
Mr. Hollins, Mrs. Daly, the previous prosecution witness, has testified that your wife called Matthew by the name Joanne throughout the whole incident. Did you hear her use that name?
Yes.
Do you know why she called him Joanne?
No, I don't.
Or does the name Joanne have any particular significance for you and your wife, Mr. Hollins?
Yes. It was our daughter's name. She died when she was a baby 3 years ago.
I'm very sorry. How did your daughter die?
I don't really know.
Well, surely you must know, Mr. Hollins.
No. I was away from home on business at the time.
Oh, was she ill?
Not when I went away.
So it was a sudden death?
Yes, it was.
How terrible for you.
Yes, it was.
Well, wasn't there an inquest into her death?
Yes.
Surely they must have told you how she died.
No. They didn't seem to know. Nobody knew. She had put her down after a meal without winding her properly, and Joanne had choked on her own vomit.
Do you really want this evidence?
She killed my daughter, and now she's trying to kill my son.
Mr. Hollins, wasn't the decision of the coroner's court that Joanne had in fact died from natural causes, which could not be explained at post-mortem?
Yes.
Your daughter Joanne was in fact a perfectly natural cot death, isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, I can't accept that.
Well, whether you accept it or not, Mr. Hollins, that was the verdict of the coroner's court, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins, are you engaged in a court action against your wife, the defendant?
I am, yes.
Will you tell the court the purpose of that action?
A number of things are involved.
Well, isn't it true that the main object is to secure the custody of your two sons?
I considered the boys would be better off with me.
Just answer the question, please, Mr. Hollins. Is the main object of your court action against your wife to secure the custody of your sons?
Yes.
You must be very anxious about the outcome.
Naturally, I am.
And perhaps a little hopeful about today's proceedings.
I'm afraid I don't follow you.
Well, it surely must have occurred to you, Mr. Hollins, that if your wife is found guilty of this charge, your chances of gaining custody of your sons will be greatly improved.
I would imagine so.
Oh, I'm quite certain you do, Mr. Hollins. It will, in fact, be greatly to your advantage if your wife is found guilty on this charge, will it not?
I'm not thinking of my advantage. I'm thinking of my son's best interests. Why couldn't they see something like this would happen? It's been on the card since the day he was born.
I won't warn you again, Mr. Hollings. You must not make such statements.
She never wanted Matthew. They're not all natural mothers because they got the ability to bear a child.
Mr. Hollings, you must stop these outbursts.
Dr. Bennett, you were on duty on Sunday, September the 6th, in the casualty department of Fulchester General Hospital.
I was not.
Excuse me?
The casualty department of Fulchester General is closed on a Sunday. Has been for over a year. However, I was on duty in the hospital when Matthew Hollings was brought in. I elected to treat him myself rather than delegate one of the junior hospital doctors.
Why was that?
Because I knew the background of the child.
In what way, Dr. Bennett, did you know Matthew Hollings' background?
In my then position as senior registrar in casualty, I was on duty the day little Joanne Hollings was brought in by her mother. I had the unfortunate task of telling Mrs. Hollings that our efforts to revive her daughter had been in vain.
So you felt a particular interest in Matthew Hollings?
As I knew him to be a replacement child, and he'd been brought in with a non-accidental injury, I was interested. I was concerned.
A non-accidental injury? Why in particular? Because you knew he was a replacement for a child who had died?
Because I have for some years taken a particular interest in replacement children and the mother's attitude towards them.
And what have you found?
I've found that a bereaved mother needs a great deal of help if she's to relate adequately to a subsequent child.
Are you saying that a bereaved mother frequently has difficulty in relating to such a child?
Such rejection is very common. It is an accepted fact.
Do you believe that Jennifer Hollings had rejected her son, Matthew?
Oh, Your Honour.
No, Mr. Jessup.
Dr. Bennett, would you tell the court what you found when you examined Matthew Hollings?
Certainly. There were severe contusions on the left side of the head where I believe he'd been hit against a wooden fence. The left humerus was broken and the left ulna in 2 places. There was extensive bruising to the right upper arm and the left thigh, consistent with the grip of an adult.
Was the child conscious?
He was fully conscious.
What were his injuries?
The child's left arm was broken in 3 places. He was severely bruised. His head was bleeding from the injuries received as he was swung against the fence.
Was he crying?
He was sobbing. I admitted him immediately.
Did you reach any conclusion about the cause of his injuries?
Obviously, the child had been held by an adult with one hand around the right upper arm and the other around his left thigh. He'd then been shaken violently and either thrown or swung against a solid object for some period of time, not just once or twice. The massive contusion was too great.
How serious were Matthew Hollings' injuries?
Oh, they were very serious, but not life-endangering. I was more concerned about the injuries that could not be immediately seen.
What sort of injury? Do you mean emotional injury?
Well, yes, that of course, but I was referring to the possibility of brain damage. As soon as the child was in a fit condition, an EEG was performed.
An EEG?
An electroencephalogram, Your Honour. It records the pattern of the brain waves.
The pattern of the brain waves.
Happily, it was perfectly normal.
Nevertheless, he had sustained the sort of injury that might have caused permanent damage to the brain?
Certainly.
Dr. Bennett, you've told the court that you knew Matthew Hollings' background. Was your meeting with Mrs. Hollings on the day of her daughter's death your only contact with the family?
No, I subsequently treated Mrs. Hollings several times during her pregnancy with Matthew.
Are you also a gynecologist?
No, I treated her in my capacity as senior registrar in casualty. She was extremely depressed following the death of her daughter.
So, unlike most pregnant mothers, she was not joyfully awaiting the birth of her child.
I feel you have a somewhat romanticised masculine view of pregnancy, Mr. Jessup. I would not agree that most pregnant women are in the happy condition you describe.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett.
Dr. Bennett, have you had any contact with Mrs. Hollins since the birth of Matthew?
Not in person. I have spoken to her on the telephone on 2 occasions.
Will you tell the court the gist of those telephone conversations?
Yes. Mrs. Hollings was very distressed on both occasions. Matthew had a heavy cold and she was afraid to put him down to sleep for the night.
Do you know why she was afraid?
Certainly. Some cot-death infants have had a cold in the previous 24 hours. She was afraid that if she let him fall asleep, he might not wake up again.
So Mrs. Hollins needed reassurance that Matthew would not fall to sleep and never wake up again as his sister Joanne had done.
Yes.
Or would you describe that as the reaction of a mother who has rejected her child?
No. I think her feelings towards Matthew are ambivalent. It's quite typical in these cases. The bereaved mother does in fact love the replacement child. However, she interprets that feeling as being evil. She sees it as disloyalty towards the dead child. She feels guilty about loving the replacement child, so she suppresses that love. Until we have more counselling for parents in this situation, more and more cases like this will arise.
Oh, nevertheless, Dr. Bennett, you have never seen my client and Matthew together, so how are you qualified to talk about their relationship?
I'm not. I'm speaking in general.
But speaking in particular, the action of my client in telephoning you about her son was that of a normal, loving mother.
It could be.
Well, was it or wasn't it?
It was.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett.
No, she didn't want to let go of the child at all. But eventually, Mr. Hollins and I managed to drag him from her by force. It was very difficult. I could see that he was badly hurt, and I didn't want him injured any more in a struggle.
And what happened after you'd got the child away from Mrs. Hollins, Constable Warren?
My colleague had already radioed for an ambulance, and so there was one standing by. And we sent the child off to Fulchester General Hospital. The defendant was taken in the car to the police station.
Did you question her?
Yes. I tried to. She wasn't very cooperative. In fact, she became quite abusive and refused to answer any questions. But she did keep asking me how the child was.
Did you tell her?
We didn't know immediately. I thought it best not to tell her the child's condition until we knew for certain. Then, when we finally got the all clear from the hospital, I told her.
You told her the full extent of the injuries?
Yes.
You told her about the massive contusions on the head, the severe bruising of the limbs, and the fact that his arm was broken in 3 places?
Yes.
What was the defendant's reaction?
It was very strange.
Go on.
I've never really seen anything like it before.
Yes.
She seemed to be absolutely delighted.
Thank you, Constable Warren.
The case of the Crown versus Hollings will continue tomorrow in the Crown Court. The case you're about to see is fictional, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public.
I call Jennifer Ann Hollings.
The prosecution case is that the defendant, Jennifer Hollings, was seen to drag her son Matthew, aged 15 months, from his pushchair and attack him, causing grievous bodily harm. The case for the defense is about to begin. The defendant is just taking the stand.
I don't want to take the oath. I wish to affirm.
Could you explain why, Mrs. Hollins?
The oath would be meaningless to me, Your Honour. I don't believe in God. But I will tell the truth.
Thank you, Mrs. Hollins.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mrs. Hollings, I am extremely sorry to have to subject you to this. But before we go into the details of the incident with Matthew, I would like to ask you about the death of your daughter, Joanne. I believe she died on August the 15th, 1978. Would you tell us what happened? Are you all right?
Yes. I went to get Joanne. She was asleep. I thought she was asleep. I picked her up. And her head fell right back. And her eyes opened, and they rolled back in her head until only the whites were showing. And her arms fell back, and her little fists.
You see, Miss Brampton, I had to be satisfied that this is really necessary.
I'm afraid it is, Your Honour.
Very well. Get Mrs. Hollings a glass of water. Do sit down if you want to, Mrs. Hollings.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm quite willing to adjourn for 15 minutes if you don't feel capable of carrying on just now, Mrs. Hollings.
No, thank you, Your Honour. I'll be all right now.
Are you ready?
Yes. As I said, her arms fell back and her fists opened just by themselves, like flowers opening.
Then what did you do?
I ran with her and I phoned the ambulance. I didn't know that she was dead. I'd never seen anybody dead before. I thought that dead people were cold. She was warm. I tried to give her the kiss of life while we waited, and then we went in the ambulance to the hospital, and Dr. Bennett told me that she was dead. I didn't know until she told me. They kept giving her oxygen in the ambulance. I suppose they didn't want to tell me.
Your husband was working away from home, wasn't he?
Yes, he was down at one of the southern branches.
What was his reaction?
Oh, he was shattered. Just as much as I was.
What was his reaction to you? Was he supportive?
Oh, yes. At first he was. He held me together. But after the inquest, he changed.
In what way?
Well, because they couldn't give a reason why Joanne had died, he assumed that I must have done something to cause her death. Not on purpose, he never said that, but I must have been negligent in some way.
So he blamed you?
Most people did, I think. It just hurt more coming from him. I used to hear people saying if only I'd breastfed her, or if she'd had a safety mattress and a baby intercom and no pillow. But David knew that I'd done all the so-called right things, and he still blamed me.
And how did you feel about that?
I blame myself, too. I felt so guilty anyway. I thought that David was right, that the coroner had said that there was no cause of death so as to spare my feelings. It wasn't until months later, well into the pregnancy with Matthew, before I began to believe any differently.
Oh? And how did that come about?
My social worker.
Yes?
She put me in touch with a society for the parents of children who have died as a result of cot death. Only we don't call it that. It's actually called Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, SIDS for short. It took a long time, but the more people that I met who'd been through the same experience as I had, including quite a few doctors, the more I began to realize that I really hadn't caused Joanne's death.
Was it at that point that you separated from your husband?
No, it was later, after Matthew was born. He had to spend 3 months down in the south again. It was the first time since Joanne had died. He wanted his mother to move in while he was away. I said, no, we don't get on too well. And then he said that she had to stay with me.
Did he give you a reason why he wanted his mother to stay?
He said otherwise he'd worry too much. Because how did either of us know that I hadn't had a brainstorm and suffocated Joanne myself? He left the next day. He said I needn't worry. No court would ever give custody of her children to a suicidal woman who'd already proved that she was unfit to bring up a child.
Mrs. Hollins, now that you've told the court the background to all this, tell us what happened on Sunday morning, the 6th of September.
David came round to the house and I handed Stephen over. I got Matthew ready in his pushchair to go down to the river.
Why didn't you let Matthew go with your husband as well?
Because I'm still afraid to let him out of my sight. They say that SIDS doesn't run in families, but I know too many people that it's happened to more than once. And one woman who has lost 4 children.
Mrs. Hollins, are you saying that someone lost 4 children as a result of this infant death syndrome?
Yes, Your Honour. The 3rd and 4th babies were placed in foster homes. The mother went to look after them every day.
Why was that?
Well, she wanted it like that, Your Honour. I think she thought that people had the idea that it was her fault. She wanted it to be quite clear that it wasn't. And both the 3rd and the 4th babies, who were placed in different foster homes, died at around 6 months in their sleep.
Good heavens. Carry on, Miss Clemson.
Now, you wouldn't let your husband take Matthew?
Yes, I might when he's a bit older, but not yet. When I got outside with the pushchair, David was waiting. We had a bit of an altercation. Then he got back into the car. After he'd gone and I was walking along with Matthew, I noticed that he'd fallen asleep, so I started to talk to him. He didn't seem to be moving,
You started talking to him because he was asleep? Well, that would seem odd to most people.
Yes, I'm sure. It just gets you like that. SIDS babies only have one thing in common for certain. They are always asleep when it happens. It's as if, well, to me, it's as if there is a certain level of sleep that you mustn't go beyond, because if you do, you don't wake up again. So when Matthew's asleep, I talk to him, and if he doesn't move, then I talk a bit louder, and eventually he stirs in his sleep, or I notice the rise and fall of his chest, or I feel the warm breath from his nose, and I feel all right again. Well, I feel more than all right. If it hasn't happened to you, how can you possibly explain how ecstatic you can be just to see your baby breathe? I am sorry, I can't remember what I was saying.
You noticed Matthew was asleep, so you started talking.
Oh, yes. I went down Bank Lane. Somebody was coming up towards me. I didn't really notice who, but I suppose that was Mrs. Daly. I was shouting at Matthew. I was jiggling the pram, but nothing was happening. I leaned over and I tickled him, still nothing, so I tickled him a bit harder.
Take it a little more slowly, if you will, Mrs. Hollins. You see, the jury and I must be able to understand your evidence. This is very important to your case.
I'm sorry. Yes. I tickled him a bit harder. He didn't move. I went absolutely cold. I thought, now don't be stupid, don't panic. He's perfectly all right, he's just very fast asleep. But I know that he's a very light sleeper, anything wakes him. So I picked him up. And as I did, his head fell back. And his eyes rolled. And his arms fell back. And his hands opened up. Like flowers, like Joanne, just like Joanne. Look, I saw that Matthew was dead. It had happened to me again. There was a young girl walking towards me. I held him out to her and I said, "Take him." And then I thought, no, I won't let you go so easily, so I shook him and I swung him against the fence. I don't know how long. It seemed like hours until my arms were aching. It seemed useless. It seemed for nothing. His lips and his cheeks were blue, and then suddenly he opened his mouth and he screamed.
Mrs. Hollins, did you intend to harm your son?
No.
And what did you believe when you took him out of the
It isn't a
pushchair?
question of what I believed. I knew that he was dead.
Then what were you trying to do?
I was trying to bring him back to life. And I did. My son was dead. And now he's alive.
Do you love Matthew, Mrs. Hollings?
Well, of course I do.
Have you always loved him?
Yes.
Are you sure? Always?
Yes.
From the day that he was born? How did you feel about him then? On the day that he was born?
I felt confused.
Wouldn't it be more accurate to say you were bitterly disappointed? After all, you'd lost your beloved daughter. You already had a son.
No. Whatever sex he'd been, it would have been very hard for me.
Isn't it true that during the first 2 weeks of Matthew's life, you couldn't be persuaded to touch him?
Yes. I wanted to, but I couldn't.
Isn't it the case, Mrs. Hollings, that you were perfectly prepared to love a girl as a replacement for Joanne, but you found yourself, sadly, incapable of loving a boy?
No, it is not true. It really isn't.
Mrs. Hollings, I'm not quite clear as to what you actually did in Bank Lane on September the 6th.
But I've already said.
I mean your actions once you had pulled Matthew from the pushchair.
I don't know. I shook him.
Gently or violently?
Violently, I suppose.
You shook him violently. Then what did you do?
I held him tightly and I hit him against the fence.
Which part of him?
His head.
How many times?
I don't know.
Once, twice, more than that?
More than that.
20 times? 50?
I don't know.
At what point did his head start bleeding?
I don't know.
Mrs. Hollings. Mrs. Hollings. If you really suspected your child might be dead, why didn't you ask other people what they thought? Mrs. Daly was just further up the road. There was a young girl standing near you. Why didn't you check with them?
I didn't think of it.
Tell me, Mrs. Hollings. How does your story of a desperate attempt at resurrection fit in with the fact that throughout the attack you were, to quote Mrs. Daly, screaming and swearing at him at the top of your voice?
I wasn't.
Are you saying that Mrs. Daly is lying for some reason?
No, of course not. I was screaming and swearing, I expect, but not at Matthew.
Who else could it possibly
Oh,
have
I
been
don't
directed at?
know. God, I suppose, because it had happened to me again.
Really, Mrs. Hollings, you do surprise me. You affirmed in this court, stating that you do not believe in God, yet now you claim to have been swearing at God. Isn't that a little inconsistent of you?
Yes, I expect it is. Oh, all right. Life, nature, the world, whatever you want to call it. Believe me, when something like that happens to you, you need something to scream at.
Well, let me see if I understand you, Mrs. Hollings. You thought at a cursory glance that your son was dead, so without bothering to get a second opinion, and despite the fact that you were only 5 minutes away from a hospital, you began raving against a God you don't believe in, and bashing the child's head against a fence in order to save his life. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I suppose it is. But it wasn't like that. You heard what I said.
Mrs. Hollings.
My learned friend has implied that you do not love Matthew because of his sex, Mrs. Hollins. Is that true?
No. There's no truth in it at all. It was very hard for me at first. Doing all the things that I had done with Joanne. Dr. Bennett was right. Loving the next one does seem like disloyalty. But it isn't like that now.
How has it changed?
Well, to me, Matthew is Joanne. All the things that I do for him, I'm doing for her.
Is it a disappointment to you that Matthew wasn't a girl?
To me, he is Matthew and he's Joanne. He's doubly precious.
Thank you, Mrs. Hollings.
I was meeting my boyfriend, the Deaf and Dumb Club. I saw that woman there pick the baby from the pram. She looked very frightened. She tried to give me the baby and said, "Take him."
Sharon, are you absolutely sure that's what Mrs. Hollins said?
Yes, she's very easy to lip read her.
Did you see this lady attack her son?
No.
I saw the woman trying to save the baby's life. I know what I saw in Bank Lane. I saw a miracle.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sharon, you say you saw a miracle. Where were you coming from when you walked up Bank Lane on Sunday, September the 6th?
I'd been to church, St. Mary's.
So when you call this a miracle, you mean it was performed by God?
Our Lady, she took pity on the mother there.
Was this the only miracle you have seen, Sharon?
I've seen 4.
Will you tell me about them?
When I went on holiday to Lourdes, I saw a man in a wheelchair. He hadn't walked since he was a boy. When he touched the water, he could walk again. Everybody saw it.
And the other miracle?
a blind man. The second time I went to Lourdes, he started to see again, and his eyesight got better and better. There he could see well. It was in the newspapers about it.
And the fourth miracle was when you saw Matthew Hollings in Bank Lane.
Yes.
Sharon, when were you asked to give evidence to this court?
About 1 week after it happened.
Who asked you?
Mrs. Hollings there.
Did she give you any reason why she particularly wanted you to give evidence?
Yes.
Yes, of course. She said I was the only one near enough to see the baby was dead.
She said that to you?
Yes. Well,
And are you sure that before she said that to you, you thought the child was dead?
no.
I knew before she told me.
Don't stop her.
I don't believe what, I don't believe what people tell me. I saw it myself.
The case of the Crown versus Hollings will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. The case which you're about to see is fictional, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public. Jennifer Hollings is charged with wounding with intent to commit grievous bodily harm to her son Matthew, aged 15 months. The defence's case is that Mrs. Hollings, who had previously lost a child as a result of sudden infant death syndrome, cot death, found her son dead in his pushchair, and he sustained his injuries during her desperate and successful attempt to revive him. The prosecution claimed that Mrs. Hollings had in fact rejected her son from birth as an inadequate replacement for the daughter who died. Counsel for Jennifer Hollings is examining Mrs. Hilary King, a social worker, appearing here as a character witness for the defendant.
Mrs. King, have you had much opportunity of seeing the defendant and Matthew together?
Oh, yes, of course. I've been visiting Jenny regularly for the last, 3 years, usually once a week. And since Matthew was born, I don't think I've ever seen them apart.
And how would you describe Mrs. Hollins' relationship with her son?
She's an extremely loving mother to both her sons. A bit overprotective, in fact, but that's only natural in the circumstances.
The prosecution have alleged that Mrs. Hollins rejected Matthew because he was a boy, and therefore not a suitable replacement for Joanne. What would you say to that?
That's nonsense. She did have initial difficulties in bonding with Matthew, but that's all over long ago. Those boys are Jenny's life.
And do you believe Mrs. Hollins is capable of violence towards her children?
I'm absolutely certain that she isn't.
Thank you.
Are you absolutely certain Mrs. Hollings is incapable of violence towards her children?
Well, I've just said so. She's not the sort of person to use violence.
Have you heard the evidence in this case, Mrs. King?
No.
Do you know that the child's head was injured so badly as he was swung against a wooden fence that it was thought he might be brain damaged? His limbs were covered in bruises. His left arm was broken in 3 places during the attack.
She can't have.
Therefore, you are absolutely certain the defendant is incapable of doing any of the things she admits she did in Bank Lane. Thank you, Mrs. King. No more questions, Your Honour.
You are Professor Gareth Lloyd, M.A., M.B., MRCS, FRCP, FRC Path, FRS. That is right, isn't it?
I am.
You're a specialist in terminal diseases of childhood?
Yes. I'm at present engaged in research into SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome, and have been for many years.
For the benefit of the court, Professor Lloyd, would you explain the term sudden infant death syndrome as simply as possible?
Certainly. SIDS is, quite simply, the sudden and unexpected death of a child in infancy for which no adequate cause is found at post-mortem.
And is it very rare?
No, I'm afraid it's frighteningly common. More than 2,000 babies die from SIDS every year, and that's just in the British Isles. In fact, many more children die as a result of SIDS than the total number of children under 15 who are killed in road accidents. And although medical research has made great strides in other directions, the number of SIDS victims is not decreasing.
And what is the current thinking about the cause of SIDS?
Research is going on into many different possible explanations. Heart arrhythmias, prolonged sleep apnea, the so-called Undine's curse, respiratory viral infections, allergies, bacterial infections. Do you want me to list them all? Current thinking is that most cases are due to one or other of the possible causes under investigation, and perhaps more usually a combination of those causes at a time of low resistance.
Professor Lloyd, as well as the large number of children who actually die as a result of SIDS, aren't there a large number of what are termed near misses?
Most assuredly. We are quite certain that the number of near misses must greatly exceed the number of deaths.
What is a near miss?
An infant who almost dies for no apparent reason. He or she is resuscitated at the hospital or by the parents. And there must be many more whose parents find them apparently normal in the morning, and who never know how close a brush with death they had the night before.
What is the most important factor involved in making the difference between being a near miss and being a victim of SIDS?
I can, of course, only conjecture. But as in my experience, which has been substantial, no SIDS victim has ever been observed to die. They have all been dead when found. I would judge the most important single factor to be time. The sooner you find the child, the sooner resuscitation attempts begin, the better the chance he has of survival.
Is it possible that Matthew Hollins was a near-miss SIDS victim?
It is certainly possible.
Now, Professor, it is a bizarre claim in the eyes of many people that the dead can be brought back to life. But is that possible?
Our definition of death has altered a great deal even in the last 10 years. The controversy over brain death surely can't have escaped anyone's notice. It is perfectly possible that Matthew was in a condition which any lay person would accept as being dead. I listened to Mrs. Hollings' description of him. She said his cheeks and lips were blue, his head and arms limp, his eyes rolled back into his head. The child was cyanotic and comatose. He would certainly appear dead.
You didn't actually examine the child, did you?
No, Your Honour.
Are you saying that Matthew Hollings was a near-miss victim of this sudden infant death syndrome? How can you say that when you haven't examined the child yourself?
I'm not saying that he was a near miss, Your Honour. All I am saying is that it is hypothetically possible that the situation described by the defendant could have happened. And if it did, it is also hypothetically possible that the child was a near miss SIDS.
As long as it's perfectly clear to the jury that you at no time examined the child.
Your Honour, I think it very doubtful that anything could have been learned from the subsequent examination of the child once he was conscious and breathing had returned to normal.
Thank you, Professor Lloyd. Go on, Miss Brampton.
Given, as you said, that the most important factor is time, making the difference between an SIDS victim and a near miss, is it also possible that Mrs. Hollins' prompt action saved Matthew's life?
That's a very difficult one. If bodily functions had ceased, then certainly the most important thing would be to get them started again as soon as possible.
So what are you saying?
I'm saying that in the state of utter panic she must have been in if this happened. And using methods I certainly would not recommend. It is just possible she saved his life.
Thank you, Professor Lloyd. Would you tell the court what area of cot death research you are engaged in?
I'm working together with a number of colleagues on a long-term study with the aim of producing a list of factors which render an infant particularly high risk from SIDS. We already know certain factors, but much more research needs to be done.
Does Matthew Hollins come into this high-risk category?
As the sibling of an SIDS victim? Yes.
Now, Professor, Dr. Bennett stated earlier that a replacement baby is often rejected by the bereaved mother. Would you agree with that statement?
No, not altogether, although it is an accepted truism. My work frequently brings me in contact with mothers and fathers of replacement children, and I have yet to meet a case of outright rejection. From my own experience, I can say that there are early difficulties. Bonding is not so automatic as with the infant who died. But once these difficulties have been overcome, the relationship with a replacement child can be a particularly deep and rewarding one. And I do speak from personal experience here. I entered this particular field when my own first child was a victim of SIDS.
Thank you very much, Professor Lloyd. I have no more questions.
Professor Lloyd, I'm a little worried that because you've stated that what the defendant claims is possible, your evidence might be felt to lend weight to that claim. Isn't it true that a far more probable cause for Matthew Hollings' injuries is simply that he's the victim of a savage attack by his mother?
Of course.
Thank you, Professor. No more questions, Your Honor. Your Honor, there is a matter of law.
Well, perhaps the jury would like to stretch their legs for 10 minutes or so.
And so, Your Honor, it was not apparent to the prosecution that this defence would be raised. Could I therefore apply for permission to recall Dr. Bennett as a witness in rebuttal of Professor Lloyd's evidence?
Are you agreeable, Miss Brampton?
It's not usual, Your Honour. Surely they should have known this defence was in prospect, given the background of the case.
You may recall Dr. Bennett, Mr. Jessup.
When you examined Matthew Hollings on September the 6th, immediately after the incident, were there any signs that he had been, to quote Professor Lloyd, cyanotic and comatose?
None at all.
Would you have expected to find such signs, Dr. Bennett?
Certainly, and there were none. There's no possibility in my mind that Matthew Hollings had ever been in such a condition.
Dr. Bennett, could you tell the court in your own words? Your Honour, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is an interesting case, is it not? We don't hear claims of resurrection from the dead and visions of miracles every day. So in case they cloud the actual facts, I should like to remind you of them. On September the 6th, Jennifer Hollings was seen to pull her son from his pushchair, to shake him violently, to strike his head repeatedly against a wooden fence. She broke his arm in 3 places, caused a head injury so severe that brain damage was suspected, and badly bruised his limbs. She explains her actions by saying she thought her son was dead. We've heard from the evidence of Police Constable Warren that she was delighted when told the extent of her son's injuries. What normal, loving mother could have expressed such an emotion under those circumstances? And to support her claim that Matthew was anything but perfectly normal when she attacked him, we have only the word of a religious, impressionable young woman who thought she saw a miracle. A girl who was much given to seeing miracles. And remember that it was Jennifer Hollings herself who asked Sharon to give evidence, actually saying to her, "You are the only one who knows he was dead." Who knows what Sharon thought before she spoke to Mrs. Hollings? It is no doubt very pleasing that there are still such girls as Sharon to be found, but I do not think much credence can be given to her testimony. Professor Lloyd's evidence is part of a smokescreen set up by the defense in order to distract your attention from the facts of the case, as was the questioning of the defendant concerning the death of a child. A smokescreen. Well, we all agree that sudden infant death syndrome is a scourge and that the death of Joanne Hollings is a tragedy. But these things, like the flowers that bloom in the spring, have nothing to do with the facts of the case. As Professor Lloyd himself agreed, it is far more probable that Matthew Hollings was the victim of a savage attack by his mother. A savage and public attack that had to be explained because it had been witnessed. And in order to explain it, Jennifer Hollings was prepared to use the death of her daughter. You may feel that the defendant is an intelligent woman, intelligent enough to have moulded her version of what happened in order to fit SIDS, intelligent enough to have planted the suggestion in her witness's mind. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, if, mistakenly as I think, you are convinced the defendant thought her son was dead, it would be a very powerful basis for mercy and leniency in the sentence imposed on her. It would be a reason for not punishing her. It would not be a reason for not convicting her. Bear this in mind while listening to the closing speech for the defense. I've no doubt my learned and very capable friend will tug very effectively at your heartstrings. But do not allow yourselves to be misled. Keep your mind on the facts and remember that however sympathetic you may be, you must remember that you have taken the oath in order to find a verdict according to the evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Your Honor, my learned friend on this unique occasion is quite wrong. I do not seek to win your sympathy for my client, merely your understanding. Jennifer Hollings is a woman who has endured what must arguably be the greatest anguish it is possible for a woman to suffer. Mostly, of course, the deaths of young children occur from reasons which can be understood. If your child developed leukemia and died, you will grieve. But you will not think you caused the leukemia to develop. If he is run down by a drunken driver, you will grieve. But you will know you were not the cause of the accident. But sudden infant death syndrome is an entirely different matter. If you have a fine, healthy baby, and you put him down to sleep, and half an hour later find her dead, you will grieve. You will wait for someone to explain what happened to your child. But the SIDS parent has no such explanation forthcoming. She can only wait and eventually be told that her child died of natural causes for no reason. My learned friend has made much of the fact that Sharon McLaughlin is the only witness who supports my client's assertion that Matthew was dead when she took him out of the pushchair. He insists that little credence can be placed in her testimony for the reason that she is a religious girl who has seen miracles performed at Lourdes. Well, I don't honestly understand what my learned friend means. Are we expected to dismiss out of hand the possibility that miracles occur at Lourdes, or anywhere else for that matter? Should we place little credence from now on the testimony of anyone who has ever seen a miracle? Must Catholics from henceforth give up their belief in the miracle of bread and wine at communion before they can be believed in court? I did not spend so much of your time discussing SIDS because I wanted to cloud the facts of the case, but because I wanted to make them clearer. I wanted you to understand how it felt to be Jennifer Hollins at that moment in Bank Lane when she knew her son was dead. If she had seen a speeding car careering out of control towards her child, if she had then tossed him across the road, breaking every bone in his body to avoid his being crushed by that car, this case would never have come to court. Because we all understand that a mother must have the right to save her child from the path of a speeding car. And in fact, Matthew Hollins was in danger from something which kills far more children than any speeding car, as Professor Lloyd told us. Something just as real, but not as tangible. Something we cannot understand in the way we understand a speeding car. But keep that speeding car in your mind and ask yourself what you would think of a woman who waited the 5 minutes necessary to reach the hospital. In such cases, 5 minutes or 5 seconds is the difference between life and death. And if you cannot bring yourself to believe that the dead can be brought back to life, that Jennifer Hollins, as she insists, and as I truly believe, resurrected her son, then ask yourself, did Jennifer Hollins believe it? She certainly had reasonable grounds for doing so after her experience with Joanne. And even if you think she was mistaken in that belief, as long as she believed it, then you must find her not guilty, because there was no intention in her mind to injure her child. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Your Honor.
But if you believe that the defendant, albeit mistakenly, was trying to save her child's life, then you must find her not guilty. However, if you do not think that, there is something I ought to make clear to you. Obviously, much that you have heard in this case will incline you to feel sympathetic towards the defendant. And I would obviously reflect that sympathy in any sentence I may be called upon to pass. But put that out of your mind Your duty is to find a true verdict according to the evidence.
Prisoner will stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
We have.
Do you find the defendant, Jennifer Hollings, guilty or not guilty of the charge of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm to Matthew James Hollings?
Not guilty.
Mrs. Hollings may be discharged.